podcast. So much universe, so little time.
Hey everyone, it's Mark Zielinski, and it's another episode of Pannilore coming at you here on the Mantic Universe podcast. This is Mark Zielinski, and I'm sitting here with Wiki Dave.
Hi everyone, how's it going? And I'm saying that like you can respond, but you can't. So hi.
There you go. Well, we have what I consider an exciting episode tonight, and Dave, I think we're biting off a little bit more than we can chew, but we're going to give it a good old college try. So,
yeah.
What is our topic for tonight?
All right. So, everyone, don't get too. Oh God, this is a long one episode, and you're looking at probably at the time code, and you're going to realize how long this is before we even get into this. But we are going to go for the entire timeline of the Pannithor universe. So, we are really going to be touching on the events. We're not going to deep dive into every single one. So we have deep dived into one before, which is the Winter's War, which you can, we'll put a link below of checking that out. But we're basically just going to go through the timeline, and hopefully by the end of it, you'll be able to go from Dungeon Saga Origins all the way to Clash of Kings 2025. You will understand where we are and the events that take place. And this is actually influenced by a Facebook post that I saw of people a little bit confused about where the timeline is, what major events. I have put links down below of some wiki pages that I built, such as the major events page, and also an extensive timeline of everything that I know by year. And that will all be in the links below. So if you do want to take your time and go through it, it's there. So that's what we're going to do, because I feel like these lore podcasts, it's a bit confusing if you don't really know the sequence of events. And I think that's really key to get into any universes, to know where you are in the timeline. And I think it's very important, especially how especially the Wings of Sar novels do actually go back in time. Even the recent one, Claws on the Plane, actually goes back a few years than where the timeline actually is. So it's always good to establish where we're at with it. Does that all make sense there, Mark? I kind of rambled a little bit there.
Well, it all makes sense, and you inspired another episode, but we'll talk about that later. So,
okay.
We've got to get this all straightened out before we head east in Pannithor. So,
whatever's happening east, there is something happening east. And I think what we'll probably do eventually is a bit of a speculation episode. If anyone is keen, we could just get some questions from the audience of what to expect, what we'd like fleshed out in terms of the lore that has been, and also what we would like to see going forward. I think that'll be a really cool lore episode as well.
Yeah, if you've been checking out Kings of War Champions, you know that there's a little widget in each of the company sets, a little piece of MDF, and people have started to assemble them, and it looks like it's starting to create a new faction symbol. So are we going to see a new faction coming?
It looks like claws. It looks like someone's made it out of claw or something like that. But anyway, before we dive too much into that, we'll go into
It's time for the news.
There we go. I had to do it.
There you go. I love it.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. Anyway, so the news, we don't have a lot. I like to always only make an episode when there is actually some news to talk about. So the only news we actually have is Mantic has actually released an ability to actually go on a headquarters tour for, I think it's around about £8 or something like that. However, if you go on the tour, you actually get a special exclusive figure of Garrett Hammerhand holding some ale. So it's different than the Mantic points one that you can actually send your points in and get, because he's holding an axe. This one is actually holding some ale, and he's it's
actually Goblin Blaster rum.
Yeah, which is actually a real rum. It's a real rum you can get, but also it does have some lore a bit in Pannithor of where this rum comes from. So it's actually based in, I think, you put me on the spot now. It's in the free dwarfs area. What's it? Her rum. I'm googling it right now. I'm just trying to find it. I've actually made a page for it, and it's got the actual logo, everything. Nearly there. It is in here. Here's Resting Brewing Company, and that is in, I think, Here's Rest. So the White Peat Rum, something like that. Anyway, there's a page on the Discord for it as well. So it's actually in universe, and it's also outside of universe as well. And I've made a special pledge to myself is after my heart transplant, and I get all well again, I'm allowed to drink a little bit of alcohol. I actually want my first alcohol to be Goblin Blaster rum. So I might never drink ever again, but that's my personal goal.
Very, very cool. I had some at Clash of Kings 23, so in the UK.
Was it good?
So yeah, it's very good. Actually, you know what? I take that back. We also had it at Adepticon. Mike Carter had some that was getting poured around. So yeah, I've actually had it a couple times. So yeah, it's very good.
Well, I'm a rum drinker to begin with. So I always, everyone's got their own little spirit and stuff, and some people like whiskey and so forth. Mine was always rum for some reason. So it will be a very good achievement if I ever get to that point ever. But we'll see. I could end up, I can't have alcohol ever again, but we'll see what happens. That's my goal. But yeah, if you do want that particular figurine, and if you are in the UK, I do suggest going around to the tour. I may or may not pay for someone to go there if you really want. I can chuck you a few bucks, but yeah, let us know what the figurine is like, because I think Garrick is one of those unique characters in Pannithor lore, which is slowly getting a little bit more history and more fleshed out, and I really would like to see more of him. So it's good.
Absolutely. Yeah, the tours are very popular. You can get one at GW, you can get one at Warlord, so it only made sense that Mantic did it, and from what I understand, they are going to be doing it for Clash of Kings UK. They were doing it just normally the last time I was there in 23. So, but we'll see what they have planned out. There's nothing specifically planned out right now at Mantic HQ, but they always have something on Friday. And, the tours are great. We had a good time on the tour. So.
Yeah, if you go to the Mantic store and you look up events on there, they actually have a list of events they have at Mantic HQ, and they always have tournaments, a lot of Halo stuff at the moment, but they always have a list of tournaments that you can enter as well. So, and they don't actually make a formal announcement or news announcement or even a Facebook post when they create these events. So I would recommend to just go in there on a regular basis if you are in the area, if you want to check it out a little bit more. But outside of that, we have just a little bit of a reminder of Claws of the Plane and Through Thick and Thin books being released. They officially are out, and you can get them yourself. Now, the Claws on the Plane is not available digitally on the Mantic website. However, Through Thick and Thin is. So if you do want Claws, you can go through the Wing Hussar website, but Through Thick and Thin, if you want a digital copy, you can definitely get it through the Mantic website now. And I do recommend it. It's an awesome book, and it has some characters that are currently available on the table. It fleshes those out a little bit more. And eventually we'll get Mark back on. We'll do a big deep dive into Pious and Through Thick and Thin. I think we just need to have it out for a little bit longer so people can get their eyes on it before we do that.
It would be really good to have him back on.
Yeah, he's keen to come back on. He's a friend of the pod, and me and him have. I was actually on Winged Hussar's podcast with him and Brandon, and we actually talked about exactly what we're talking about today on there. But they didn't make me, but they kind of put me on the spot, and I did a bit of a riff of the timeline off the top of my head, and I think I got it okay. So this is my fleshed out version of that particular spiel that I put there on the timeline. But on top of that, I think that's all the lore kind of news, you could say. Not a lot, but it's normally a little bit of a dead spot around this time of year. The only thing outside of that news is just tariff stuff, and we don't really need to dive into that. Mark's has probably heard enough of those being American. He's probably so sick of hearing the word tariff that, if I kept on saying a little bit more, he'd probably stab me from across the internet. So probably leave it there. Do you have anything else you want to add before we sign off on the news there?
The only other big news is my Champion stuff finally arrived today. So I'm very excited about that. And I keep seeing, the initial wave came out from Mantic. Now it's getting into the shops and people are able to start getting it. It's starting to get there from other mail order companies, etc. So my local hobby shop actually had some on the shelf and they actually got it before my mail order came. So that was shocking to me. So unfortunately, they did not get the Goblins and the Night Stalkers, or I would have bought those immediately, but they did have the 2-player starter, and they only had the Twilight Kin Company left. So they definitely sold through some of it, so I need to find out where these players are locally. And we'll go from there. So exciting stuff. Very happy to see Champions landing across the globe.
Yeah, and it's good to see, as Mark alluded to earlier, that logo being formed. I'm suspecting the other pieces are going to be with the other kits that are going to be released later this year, but it is looking like a logo of a new faction. So it'll be interesting to see what that is. It's also worth noting, and this is a little bit side piece rather than anything lore specific, in the announcement from Mantic about the tariffs and all that fun stuff, they did mention of having a fulfillment center being based in America going forward. So it sounds like they're going to be shipping stock over to that fulfillment center and then they're going to divvy out, which should, on theory, mean that at least people in North America should be getting their Mantic stuff a lot quicker than it has been in the previous. I mean, a lot of big companies do have fulfillment centers across the world. And I think for Mantic to take the step, it may seem necessary because of the tariffs, but it's actually a big step in terms of them as a company as a whole, because having a fulfillment center means stockers can get it to you a lot quicker, can also affect the cost of that price in terms of it being a little bit cheaper. And it means they just ship a whole bunch of goods to this fulfillment center and it can just sit there instead of them shipping it from the UK out to, the individuals, which can be a lot more costly. So it's worth noting that in the future, even after hopefully all this tariff stuff kind of dies away, you might have a better Mantic setup in the future as well for stock.
Right. The bad news is that Mantic is going to be having a price rise on June 1st. So if you want to get your stuff out of the UK, in particular, they're going to be raising, I believe it might be just for the U.S., but there is going to be a price rise. It sounds like it's just for the
U.S., yeah, because, there is no tariff something shipping from the U.K. to New Zealand. There isn't any tariff, but there is a tariff when you're going to the U.S. because, as everyone knows how tariffs work, the customer pays the tariff. It's not the actual company shipping it out. It's you as the consumer paying for that tariff when it arrives or when you kind of buy it. It's the tax. So I don't need to pay anything to get my goods here, but the tariff imposed means that Mark possibly would have to. So I think it's just for the US.
Yeah, I don't think that it's that bad. I mean, I think they settled on a reciprocal tariff of 10%, which I think they already had. Something like that. So
it's pretty much nothing changed. It's that deal. We're not going to get into it. Let's not get too far into it. But the deal was pretty much exactly what it was. It was like nothing changed. So
it's just a commitment to work together, which we have always worked together. We love the
exactly.
UK,
so. It's like punching your mate and say, "Hey, we're still friends, right?" And they're like, "I don't really want to be, but." Sure. Why not?
Love you, brother.
Yeah, I love you, but I'm kind of pissed off about it, but fine, let's just get on with this. And nothing changed. All right. But anyway, enough of that. We don't want to dive too much into that kind of
That's
stuff.
That's right. We got a timeline to go over.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to dive into the timeline. Now, we are going to gloss over a lot of the fundamentals about these particular events. We will deep dive into probably every single one of these events eventually, especially how we will be getting more information about certain events in this timeline. And everything is always in flux. There's some things that I have assumed go here, but we don't really know specifically. One thing that, I don't know if irk is the right word, but one thing that does bother me, Mantic's not very good with putting dates on things, especially the newer stuff. So I've locked in the dates that I know about. Some things are really wishy-washy, but I'll let you know as we go through them if I have specific dates or if I don't. But I'm sliding it into this particular time slot because it just makes sense on the whole timeline of events. Does that make sense, Mark?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're my backup.
Yeah, we can't deep dive into this. We put everybody to sleep. So first things first, you always got to read the table of contents. So this is a table of contents, and then we'll go into episodes on each of these, I'm sure, over the year. So.
Eventually, over the time, I mean, we'll get more information. But the key, Mark, your job here in this whole thing is to keep me in line so this makes sense. So if anything doesn't make sense, you stop me. And so, because if it doesn't make sense to you, it's not going to make sense to anyone out there.
I'll do my best.
You do your best. All right. So we'll start at the very beginning. We'll start with the creation of Pannithor. Now, do you know anything about the start of everything, Mark? What's your understanding?
It started as Mantica.
Mantica.
It turned into Pannithor.
Kind of.
So,
I mean,
that's how it started. So
that's the kind of wishy-washy with it. But Mantica is more like a continent because you've got Upper Mantica and you've got Lower Mantica. But the creation of Pannithor essentially started with 7 gods called, I'm butchering the pronunciation, progenitors?
The progenitors, yeah.
And they kind of come in pairs. So, like, the way you have to look at this is gods are real. In the universe of Pannithor, gods are real. Gods are a thing that does exist, and they kind of have a bit. The 7 gods that exist, they kind of are twins. So we've got Bannock, the god of life, and Shobik, the god of death. So they're kind of the opposites of each other. Then you got Opek, which is the god of light, so they're essentially the god of the sun. And then Lonok, which is the queen of the shadows, essentially the god of the moon. And then you got Threnica, which is the god of water, and Krogan, which is the god of air. Now, Krogan is probably the one probably more people have heard about because he essentially is kind of a bad god, kind of a bit of a dick. But ultimately, he is still influencing some factions in the modern day. And then finally,
the Berengar in particular. So
correct, yeah, and they actually have a very significant event that Korgan kind of pushes them to do later in the timeline as well, which is worth mentioning. So you got those 3 pairs of twins essentially that they kind of bounce off each other. But finally, you got Dinak, which is the god of the earth. So that's the kind of odd one out. There are rumors that there were more gods, but these are the 7 that kind of lasted. When all this occurred, how many years ago? Unsure. It's kind of implied that they kind of messed around just those 7, creating mountains and races and all that for years and years and thousands of years before they finally created the elves, which is the start of the noble races. So they created the noble races, humans, elves, and dwarfs. It's kind of vague who did what. Dwarfs, typically it said that Dinak did it. Elves, I believe, it was Thenica, or the god of water, or it could have been Bannock. One of them created elves, and those are deemed as the noble races. Now, it is kind of vague about whether those 3 races were the only races until the Celestians arrived, but it is also noted that ogres existed too. So there are other races that were created, but those 3 are considered what they call the noble races. And those are the ones that started honoring these deities as gods and essentially existed for many years. Now, the first dated event in the entire timeline takes place in negative year 4000. So negative 0 is when the God War finished. So we're talking about 4,000 years before the God War finished, which we'll go into what that is in a sec. That's the first noted event, and that's actually the merging of Basileia the Golden, which is the kind of the proto-Basileia as we know it today, merging with the Pannithor, the main human kind of empire. All right, Mark. So far, does that all make sense? Are you still with me?
Absolutely. Yeah. We're just going along. Right. We got the first base 3 races. They're in there, the noble races or the core character type, so to speak. So we're getting ready for a big event to happen.
Yes. So basically, for thousands of years, these races existed, honored these gods, which, based off the history, they weren't the best gods in the world. They weren't really lovely. So dwarfs do find Dinak in high regard, but for the most part, the gods didn't really care about them until the Celestians arrived. So in the year negative 1095 is when the first 20 Celestians arrive for a portal. 5 years earlier, in negative 1100, that's when contact was first made to the Celestians through the void, through an elf called Relio Lethur, something like that. He was the elf who made contact with the Celestians and brought them through. And essentially, that's when the book, The Rise of Celestians, essentially begins. And over that book, we get the second batch of Celestians, so 20. So every 100 years from that point, we got a second batch and third batch. And when they tried to do the fourth batch, things went wrong, and it kind of caused some void stuff to happen, which is actually kind of ties into the origins of the Twilight Kin around that time. So this was in the third batch came through in the year 902, and then about 100 years later, because they only could do it around about every 100 years. I think it was in negative 701. Actually, that's about 200 years gap, but that's just how the book did it. There's some time shenanigans that go in it. Ultimately, the scrying star that they had broke, and they can't bring any more Celestians through. But ultimately, Celestians are now in Pannithor, influencing and changing, and they effectively kick out the gods' influence. Those 7 gods that I talked about, they were sacrificing children, all that stuff. So they kicked them out. So now it's just the Celestians on this world influencing the noble races, and they essentially is spread everywhere and anywhere and everywhere. And yeah, that's essentially the Celestians arriving. Next big event is actually the Flillian Mirror Smashing. So this is when the Shining Ones and the Wicked Ones were created. So this was in the year negative 170. So it's approximately about 600 years later from when the Scrying Star broke and they couldn't bring any more Celestians through. About 600 years later after that, that's when the mirror was smashed. Now, this event is one of those ones that I'm going to be very vague on, because how it was originally written to how it is now has changed quite a lot. And also, we are getting a book called The Fall of Celestians, which will actually describe this event in a lot more detail. And so, if you really want a brief understanding of what went on there, read Clash of Kings 2024, because the events that take place there are very different than what's actually in the 3rd edition book and the 2nd edition book. So they rephrase it. The best way I could describe it, initially the event was described as someone who was just pissed off that a girl rejected them, but now it's a more godly influence kind of manipulation it makes a lot more sense now in terms of how this mirror smashed. Essentially, they built a mirror, it smashed, and all the Celestians split in half with a good side and a bad one. The good side being the Shining Ones and the bad ones being the Wicked Ones. And we've done an Celestian episode on that if you want to dive more into it. But essentially, They split in half. They have, a good half and bad half, and then eventually a war breaks out between the two halves, because obviously good versus bad. It's the classic, and they end up having a big old war over, dominance basically of Pannithor. This leads to the God War, which takes place between the year negative 170 to the year 0. So when the abyss splits open. And when the God War finishes, that's year 0. So that's kind of like where you can kind of central point all the other events that take place in the timeline is year 0. So during the God War, that's when orcs are created. That's when goblins are created. That's when the Eoli, or the angels, those angel creatures. That's it. That's when they're created, because they're created when one of the Shining Ones gets split in half, and then that's kind of how they come about. We got also all the herd races. We got all the Trident Realm races as well, like the Naiads, the Placiderms, now the Gilkin we know about, and the Thrill. Not the River Guard or the Pond Wardens. Those were always races that the Trident Realm actually adopted into their society. So those are another couple of races that existed before the Celestians came about. The same with the ogres as well. So it's a bit vague where those races come from, and so there are a lot more races out in the world outside of the noble races that were created. It's just very vague about who created them or how many there actually are. So yeah, the God War happens. Ultimately, the Wicked Ones lose. One of the demigods, Domovator, he gets Oskin's, the Wicked One of Oskin. He steals his axe and essentially slams it into the ground, creates this big old split, which is now called the Abyss. All the Wicked Ones got thrown into it, except for Winter. She buggered off earlier, and we'll go back into her a little bit later. But all the Wicked Ones got shoved into there, and they kind of got sealed up, and that's how essentially got trapped down there. It's a bit vague of why they're trapped down there, but it's kind of implied that there's some kind of barrier or seal that only can be broken by the reforging of Oskin's axe as well. So that's basically how that all happened. So it split, and the Shining Ones kind of went victorious, and they kind of went back and settled on the mountain of Kosovo, and they kind of just chill out there all the time there. And that's essentially the end of that, to the end of a lot of events for about 2,500 years. So it's essentially that's all peace kind of settled down. The Trident Realm races got hidden away in the ocean because they're still trying to be, hidden away. Orcs and goblins are now godless, and they're kind of running wild in the universe, and not in the universe, on the world. And essentially the world just existed for the 2,500 years and recovered. And that was until the Winter's War. So Winter, who actually didn't take part in the God War, she kind of buggered off up north. She finally acted her, revenge, her way of trying to dominate the world, and kind of froze over the world. And we've done a whole episode on that, so I'm not going to dive too much into those events. And that lasted from the year 2499 until the year 2649, so about 150 years. Now, the only thing that's changed that we know about since we did that episode, which is only a couple of months ago, it actually came out with Champions, because we found out about the Gilkin. So the Gilkin is an Aloxal. How do you say that? That species, the Aloxal.
I normally can say it. Aloxolotl or something.
Aloxolotl, that one.
Yeah.
There was a humanoid race of them, which appears to actually gone into hiding during the War of Winter, because winter was freezing over so much, and essentially that race was dying because it's too cold. And they went into hiding, a bit of a hibernation. So it's a bit unknown how many of them are actually left, but ultimately that's what happened there. I'm suspecting a lot of them went south, because all of the known map that we see actually takes place just in the northern hemisphere. You still got the equator, and you still got the southern hemisphere that's left widely undiscovered at the moment, as we know on the maps. So there's a good chance a lot of them are existing down south, because it would be a lot warmer, because winter was more on the north rather than the south. So there is a chance we could see a lot more of those in the future, but that's ultimately what happened during Winter War. She essentially froze everything over, and then eventually it led to the Great Indignation, which is basically the Great Flood. Now, some people call it the Great Flood, some call it the Great Indignation, and this was on the year 2649, essentially when Winter's War finished. So after Winter was defeated, and it's kind of vague about whether she was actually killed, or whether she kind of merged into the snow and kind of is now locked into the snow. But ultimately, all the stuff that she froze over melted, and it melted it so much that there was a massive flood, and that's what the people call Winter's Last Gift as well. It's flooded the Elven capital. It also created what we now call the Infant Sea. So that real sea in the middle that looks kind of like a little hand or a little spider, or however you want to describe it. Essentially, it flooded all those kingdoms that are there, all the nations that are there, killed a lot of people, but also destroyed a lot of nations. And effectively, that's how the Infant Sea came to be. Oh, okay. So far, I just want to check in with you, Mark, because I need a breather after that. How's that all sounding? Is all that tracking all right?
Yeah, it all makes sense. During that period of time, that's when Primivantor got put underneath the Infant Sea, and Basileia is rising, and and you got the salamanders and the Three Kings and all that. All that's happening because the Infant Sea happened, and this was Winter's last gift to the world, as she faded away, cackling away, disappearing into the snow. So Basileia kind of split off. Essentially, they became stronger because they had all the Shining Ones in their area as well, because they had got a temple for all the gods and so forth. So
Yeah, that's when you start to see the shift of power within Pannithor as well. So after the Great Flooding, now this is going to be an event that there's not really time stamped of when it occurs. All I know is that it occurs between this and other events. So it was called the Great Reckoning. Have you ever heard of the Great Reckoning before, Mark? Because this is going to be an event that I don't think a lot of people know about.
Yep. I'm looking at it, and I was going to click the link and see what it was. So go ahead, Dave, fill us in.
So you know the Varnaga, who are basically humans that are up north, and they still honor the old god, which is Korgan, which is the god of the air. Effectively, they are bad guys. They are the bad guys, but they hate, or Korgan hates the wicked and shining ones. He hates Celestians because in the Rise of Celestians, he gets his ass handed to them by them. So he's got a lot of animosity about that. And when the Abyss was created, we had the forces of Abyss essentially were created as well, and they kind of leaped out of the Abyss on a regular basis, attacking everything. So the reckoning was Korgan getting the Varga to attack the Abyss and essentially push them back and shove them back into the Abyss so they're not as powerful anymore, mainly on the first plane, because the Abyss has several planes. We could do an Abyss episode, but essentially the Abyss has several kind of levels. You've got level, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I think all goes to 7, and 7 is where all the wicked ones are hidden away. And time kind of works a little bit differently as well, so time is a lot, I think time is longer in the Abyss than on the surface. But ultimately, the Varga attack the Abyss manage to beat them all up on the first plane of first level of the Abyss, and kind of defeat them so badly that they're no longer that much of a threat. And it was kind of Korgan going, "Don't mess with me because you guys aren't as powerful as me. I've still got strength, even though you kicked my ass ages ago when you guys were Celestians. Now you're wicked ones. You stay in your lane. You are the bad guys. We are the bad guys." But you still stand in lane. So it's the first really event you see of bad versus bad, which I kind of like. I kind of like that kind of, when it's not good versus bad all the time. It's actually bad versus bad because they're both doing it for not the most noble reasons. They're doing it for power. But ultimately, the Abyss actually loses in that sense and essentially the Abyss doesn't get defeated. Essentially, the Varga do so much damage. Eventually, they have to retreat and go back up north. But essentially puts them in the place, and which is why the Abyss doesn't explode in power and doesn't go everywhere, even though they've got all this force, all these demons down there. The reason why they don't breach out is mainly because of those forces that attack them up north. And that was called the Reckoning. And there's no date on when that occurs. So I've said that happens after the Great Flood, but before the next event, which is in the year 3001, which is when the Free Dwarfs declare their independence from the Imperial Dwarfs. Now, that could change with the reckoning of where that actually sits. It just feels like that feels right to be in that slot. It could even occur before Winter's War, but all the source material kind of implies that it happens after Winter's War, of when all that stuff went down. Does that make sense? Because I kind of glossed over because we don't actually have a lot of details in the reckoning.
No, I mean, what is it? A couple paragraphs from?
So like a paragraph or two, yeah.
Yeah. So
it's definitely an event that could be expanded on.
But you got to remember, Korgan's one of the original 7. So these upstart abyssals are getting in his territory. So he's just kind of slapping them down and
Correct,
putting them in their place.
Yeah.
So there
like
they are.
That.
They're in the Abyss. So.
Yeah, and I like that. And that's why I think the Varga is definitely a faction that doesn't get a lot of notoriety, but should definitely be in the story of Pannithor, because they definitely they're the reason why the Forces of Abyss aren't as powerful going forward. All right, so we'll go to the Free Dwarfs. So the Free Dwarfs declare their independence from the normal dwarfs in the year 3001. So the Free Dwarfs are basically in the Harpy Mountains. There are Free Dwarfs everywhere, but essentially they're basically saying, hey, we don't want to be part of this empire you guys have. Essentially, they're not very good at keeping this empire together anyway. They're always going through kings. But ultimately, Free Dwarfs want to be free. Now, when we're talking about the Free Dwarfs, they're not one nation. It's only recently, after all the bad things that happened for the Free Dwarfs, that become a little bit unified. But the Free Dwarfs were more of a case of all the holds wanted to be independent from each other. Yes, they had an overall arcing council that they would get together and all kind of think of it more of the United Nations kind of thing, of that they all kind of agreed on certain principles, but they all had their own laws and will govern themselves in their own areas, which is partly the reason why one of the events that happened later on happened. Is because they worked so independently, but ultimately Free Dwarfs didn't want this overarching empire kind of feel, which is what the Dwarfs were. So essentially that's when they break off. And then about 500 years later, 550 years later, in the year 3558, that's when the Great Civil War took place in Dwarven society. So Golak, as we all know, Golak the Conqueror, he actually rose to power. Normally, you rise to power through, you just inherit the throne, but so many kings had gone through since Winter's War and things had gone really, really badly that ultimately Golak was like, no, I'm going to rise to power through political means and just take over everything. And there was a big civil war about that. Ultimately, Golak wins. Doesn't seem to be any long hostility, but it seems like also a lot of his opponents kind of got killed. So they kind of went out of power. And he's been in power ever since. And considering the year that we know it is around about 3,868, that's the last year that we know about, he's essentially been in power for about 300 years in the modern day story. After that becomes another event that we don't really know the timestamp, but I've kind of just put it here because it makes sense in the timeline, is the Great Revolt. So essentially the Ratkin were created by the Abyssal Dwarfs, because the Abyssal Dwarfs were a race that idolized the Wicked Ones. They were created by the Wicked Ones, I believe, during the God War, but again, another vague one. They were created and they wanted to, they idolized the Wicked Ones and kind of wanted to even replicate a lot of the stuff the Wicked Ones did, which is one of the things they did was create races, because the Wicked Ones created the orcs and the goblins and a lot of other races there. So they decided to make the Ratkin. So they made the Ratkin and essentially enslaved them for many, many generations. And generations of Ratkin are quite quick, because they reproduce and they were forced to reproduce on a very rapid pace. Eventually, over time, the Ratkin started developing their own language called Chitta. They started to communicate with each other, and eventually they rebelled. Not all the Ratkin, some Ratkin were kept in place. As I said, this was happening over many generations, so there was only a pocket that this happened to. So not all the Ratkin rebelled. But eventually they had something called the Great Revolt. The Ratkin rose up and essentially rebelled against the Abyssal Dwarfs, and then were set loose upon the world, basically. So it is noted in the Ascent of the Goblin King that there's rumors about free Ratkin running around. So it's something that's not overly known about free Ratkin running around, but I would say it happens around this time. It could happen earlier, it could happen later. It just feels like this is right in the timeline of when it happens, because we do know by the time, at least by Harpy's Rift, that Ratkin essentially were on their own and doing their own thing. So I would say Great Revolt right here. It's another one of those stories that I really would love fleshed out, maybe in a novel, of just explaining that. And essentially, because Ratkin are the victims here. They are classified as an evil race or as a bad race, but effectively they were bred to just be slaves and they rebelled. Same with orcs. And a lot of people deem orcs as bad, but really they rebelled against being slaves. And to be honest, I wouldn't be happy if I was enslaved myself, and then I finally broke free, and I would be a little bit ragey. So I think there's a lot of story there for Ratkin orcs to talk about, finding their own place. I think Claws of the Plain definitely dive in more in the orc side of things, but Ratkin is another area and a good opportunity for some really cool, unique stories being told out of that side of things. Have you heard of the Great Revolt before there, Mark?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And the Ratkin that were able to tunnel out and escape and stuff like that are the Ratkin, and the ones that got caught, go figure, are the Ratkin slaves. So this is where the Ratkin slaves were brought together as a faction because, as I just mentioned, they're the ones that all got caught and, brought back to the slave pits. So yeah,
I mean, ultimately the Ratkin slaves did exist before the rebellion. It's just now that they're more kept in check because the way I see from a cosmetic point of view, the difference between Ratkin and Ratkin Slave is really the skin, because you can see in some of the artwork, you see more humanoid skin, a humanoid body when you're looking at with a rat head. So you don't see any fur on that skin, and I think that's Ratkin slaves, and Ratkin are the ones that have grown it out, because one thing's, and I know this because my partner used to have pet rats. So usually when rats are stressed, they lose their fur. So with a Ratkin slave, they would be losing their fur, they would be more fleshy. But a free ratkin would be a lot more furrier, because they are not as stressed because they're free. They're not being tortured every day. So you can really start to define what a slave ratkin and a ratkin could look like as well from a cosmetic point of view. So I'm hoping we see more fleshing out there. But there is rumors that we'll get rid of ratkin slaves as a faction. But to be honest, there's no reason to. I think there's a really awesome way to define those two factions there. All right. So we're going to dive into the next bit. So at this point, we've caught up to where you probably can go track the supplement kind of progression. So the first one, and this is a relatively new entry that I've put in, is the War of the Crystal Scepter. Now, have you ever heard, this one I might throw you off a little bit, Mike. Have you ever heard of the War of the Crystal Scepter?
I have not.
All right. So there was a supplement in the first edition called Hellfire and Stone. And that was basically a campaign supplement of the dwarfs versus the abyssal dwarfs. Now, if it was released right now, it would actually be a campaign of the free dwarfs versus the probably abyssal dwarfs or Ratkin slaves. You could debate about which faction it would be. And effectively, it was Sevi, who we all know as the Lord of Quel'Jin, fighting against what was his name? Fighting against Arak Soulbinder, who was I think a rune master or warsmith of Quel'Jin for the first lord that looked after that. So Sevi's great ancestor, who was the first lord of Quel'Jin, he was betrayed by Arak Soulbinder, who his model looks wicked, and I'm very disappointed that Mantic don't sell it now. And his model is basically an abyssal dwarf mechanical spider. So he's an abyssal dwarf body with a mechanical spider legs. And I think he looks really, really cool. You can see it on the...
Oh, I remember that model. Yeah.
Yeah. So he is like... I don't know how old he is, because it's never clear of when the first Lord of Quel'Jin actually died by this red curse. So Arak Soulbinder, he basically cursed... he put the red curse on these free dwarfs, and that's how you get berserkers. So berserkers we can see this in Pride of the King, their vision goes all red and they kind of go into a bit of berserk, and they kind of just fight, and you see that's worse than Sevi. It is the worst that he gets. He goes really out of control. I think to a point he's like cuts off someone's hand when they're trying to control him, and that's because of him. Because the Arak put this curse on many, many years ago. It could be 3,000 years ago, or it could be only 800 years ago when the free dwarfs were actually created, because we don't know when that lord actually existed, the first lord. So the reason why berserkers exist is because of this red curse, and that's gone down all the generations of dwarfs, or people have kids, they are inflicted with this berserker red curse, which is the origins of berserkers, essentially. That's how berserkers exist. So they're all infected with this curse, and that war was Arak kind of trying to get hold of the scepter, the quartz scepter, in order to essentially gain even more power. However, Sevi managed to beat him. And it's a really good campaign. I do wish someone would modify it into modern day rules rather than the first edition ones. And it's probably the first kind of dip Mantic actually had into a really awesome campaign that to be honest, reading for it from a lore point of view, it really holds up. They've got a lot of references to the 300. There's even a scenario where you play as dwarfs and you just have to hold out to a particular turn, and then your next mission you get a bit of a bonus depending on how long you can actually hold out for. And it's a 300 kind of reference, and there's a lot of 300 references. Leon Hardax is the I think it's a spin on Leonidas from 300, and he's holding that gate, and it's a really good. I really wish they'll bring it back a little bit, and yeah, I would say that would be the first official kind of supplement in this timeline, because it's not really stated where this occurs. This could have occurred 200 years ago, could have occurred now, but it definitely takes place before some of the other events we're about to go through.
Yeah, I remember that supplement. I know I read it a gazillion years ago, so but I remember it absolutely. I have to go dig it off the shelf now. So
Yeah,
but I remember that
I'd love to
model,
get a
too.
hard copy. Yeah, if anyone out there has got a hard copy they want to sell me, go nuts, because I try and get hard copies of everything. I've got a lot of some of the second edition stuff. And yeah, I think that's one thing that I really wish they would bring back a little bit more of that red curse, because I do think it's a really good reason why berserkers are the way they are, is because all these years ago that this dwarf who rebelled and essentially defected to the Abyssal Dwarfs cursed them with this curse, which is now essentially used against them with berserkers. And it'll be really interesting to see whether they ever touch back onto that particular storyline again, or they just forget it, because I think that's a really good explanation why berserkers the way they are. They're not just frenzied, they're not just psychologically damaged, they're actually stuck with this blood curse that essentially they can't get rid of, that has affected their entire life, and it's spread throughout all the free dwarfs and the dwarf societies, because it's probably in little doses as the generations went through. But people that have this in their blood, just takes one little thing to trigger them, and I think that would be really interesting to dive into. Cool.
Very, very interesting.
All right, so the next one we're going to go through is Dungeon Saga, specifically Origins. So Dungeon Saga Origins is the most recent one that's come out. It's a recent version of Dungeon Saga, and as the title says, it is actually in the timeline. It is the origins to the original Dungeon Saga, which is the Dwarf King's Quest. So essentially, all 4 or 5 campaigns, because I have to include the Kickstarter one. All 5 campaigns take place at this point. And the main one you have to is the Trial of Tyranny, and the main goal there is to find the map of Dolgarth, which is the old dwarf capital, which Morbius. I'm going to call Morbius. I know it's Mortibrus. Yeah, we'll go Mortibrus. All right, Mortibrus is basically in Dolgarth, trying to find the tome of Valdor. And for unknown reasons, actually, it's more of like there's a whole bunch of undead, and he's kind of taken over that. And so the Council of Pannithor, which is Golak, and then the hegemon of Basilia, I can't remember his name at the moment, and the High King Arturus or something like that. Anyway, the names are butchered, but it doesn't really matter. The Council of Pannithor get together and assign 4 heroes to actually go and defeat Mortibrus. However, before that, Dragon Saga Origins takes place, which is then finding the map so they can get into that. So for Dragon Saga to occur, they need to find the map, which is why Dragon Saga Origins takes place. So Dragon Saga Origins happens, all 5 of them take place, and if you read through all the books, they all connect to each other. And then finally, they go into Dolgarth, which is Dragon Saga. So this is the Dwarf King's Quest. They go in there. They manage to defeat Mortibrus, all 4 of them. So that's Roihin, Mariga. Mariga. What's her name? I'm finding the name. Sorry.
She's the Elf Ranger.
Yeah. So Denethor, Roihin, Olaf, and Mariga. Starkin. That's actually her. She's actually got a surname, Starkin. And so those 4 go in there. They defeat him. However, his body kind of vanishes. It's kind of implied that he kind of gets away with some pages from the Tomb of Valdor. But ultimately, all the undead is defeated, and it looks like Roihin kind of takes over ownership and kind of trying to rebuild Dolgarth after that time. And then some years take kind of. There's a gap between the next event here, and they're kind of seen as heroes throughout the kingdom that they saved Pannithor, because they thought a big evil was returning because of Morbius's magic and so forth. So that happens, and then we go to Return of Valdor. So essentially, there's an old ruin called the Ruins of Dulanvar. Ruins of Dulanvar. I'm kind of riffing this off a little bit. Ruins of Dulanvar, and down there, Valdor actually imprisoned his lighter half, which is Bel-El. Bel-El? Yeah, Bel-El. We'll go Bel-El.
That's what I say.
Bel-El. All right, we'll go Bel-El. All right, so yeah, Vandor kind of imprisoned Belvar. Belly? God, I can't say his name. Bel-El. There we go. He imprisoned Bel-El down there, and now Mortibus has actually taken the tome and actually has gone there to try and summon him back. And ultimately, it sounds like in the story of the Return of Valdor that he actually failed, but he actually succeeded, because it's kind of vague of what happens. Ultimately, the spirit of Valdor, which was left down there to try and protect that it looks like shrine or the prison, he ended up getting defeated, and Bel-El and Mortibus actually escapes. But it kind of implies that the Fab Four actually won, but the next events can't take place if those four actually won. So ultimately, Bel-El and Mortibus survive, and they manage to escape the dungeon there. And that leads to what we call the Abyssal Crusade. Now, there's no year specified on this, but I assume this takes place 1 year before the Edge of the Abyss. So this takes place in the year 3849. So effectively, Mortibus and Bel-El's forces were opening portals to essentially expand the Abyss. And the long and short of it, they were successful. The forces are good, weren't able to stop this power, had a few wins here and there, had a few losses, but ultimately Mortibus and Bel-El managed to open the Abyss, and that's when we led to the Edge of the Abyss. So the Edge of the Abyss is probably the biggest event that has taken place in Pannithor. It's probably had the most widening repercussions. It's a war that lasted 4 years, and a lot of events take place within the Edge of the Abyss. So the Abyss essentially expanded, as they call it. Like sometimes they call it the expanding of the Abyss, but effectively portals were opened up. The damage that the Vargar did to try and keep them in there, that was now being undone, and all these forces were unleashed, including on the Brotherhood, because the Brotherhood were established to try and hold back the forces of the Abyss that were escaping. Essentially, they were overwhelmed, and they kind of split off to become the Order of the Green Lady and the Order of the Brother Mark. Essentially, the Brother Mark has become more of the elite force that is still doing what the Brotherhood initially intended to do, which is hold back the Abyss, and the forces of the Green Lady are more protecting the nature of Pannithor from the forces of bad, and essentially they are Knights of the Green Lady. So more of kind of like you could say Greenpeace. They're more Greenpeace Knights now. That look after the realm. Other events that take place is the invasion of the Harpy Mountains. So when the Edge of the Abyss happened, the Abyssal Dwarfs took that as a way of pushing out all the free dwarfs from the Harpy Mountains and essentially have them retreat south to join the faction that they had separated from the Dwarven Empire. They were all pushed out, a lot of them died, and the reason why, it's believed the reason why they failed and got overwhelmed so quickly is because what I was mentioning before, when the free dwarfs were acting independently from each other. They all were looking out for themselves. There was no communication. They weren't backing each other up when they were asking for help. So all the Abyssal Dwarfs acted as more of a unit, and they essentially overwhelmed all those forces. And then the Free Dwarfs essentially lost. The only time where they Free Dwarfs came together, was at the Chainway, right before the last surviving people were getting across the Chainway, which is the connection between the Harpy Mountains and the Dwarven Empire. The survivors, the Free Dwarf survivors that had made it north, they had essentially held the line and fought back the Abyss, and it's the only time they got together, which ended up being the foundation of them returning to the Harpy Mountains years later and acting more as more of a cohesive kind of faction rather than separate kind of faction. So that was why that event is quite significant as well. We also have the orcs in the Orcraven Plains, which is what Claws the Plains kind of based off. Essentially, orcs were going over the plains, killing a lot of the Kingdom of Men forces, which is why Devard makes that big wall to try and hold back those forces that were attacking. And the orcs were not only just attacking kingdoms of men, they were attacking nature as well, so the forces of nature and the Green Ladies' realm, you could say. And they were just kind of going a bit crazy because of the influence over the Abyss getting stronger, because the orcs still had that connection with the Wicked Ones, even though they were broken off during the God War. There were some very loyal to God speakers. They still talk to the gods, but there's definitely not as the Wicked Ones' influence over orcs isn't as powerful as it used to be, but eventually that's why it occurred, because it kind of riled them up a little bit. The last big event that happened during this 4 year, and this was near the end, which is around 3,854 when the war ended, was the flooding of the Abyss. So effectively, in order for the Abyss to be sealed up, what they had to do was flood it. So the frozen sea to the north, the Trident Realm Thrall got together, and essentially they agreed they were going to melt all that water and flood the Abyss, and essentially that should seal them off. At least it would beat them down the Abyss a little bit more, so that it takes away a lot of that openings and all the influence that they had. Now, unfortunately, to do that, they had to flood the ogres' homelands, which caused a bit of drama. So the orcs agreed to do this, and it wasn't great. A lot of orcs died. There is a good little bit in Champions of one of the orcs' story about what happens during that time, but effectively that was all flooded. It killed a lot of orcs, but not orcs, are ogres, I should say. Ogres. The ogres' homeland just got essentially wiped out, flooded. Now a lot of men, the kingdoms of men are kind of now resettling on that land. It's upsetting a lot of ogres, but ultimately that's what the Great Flooding was about. And ogres, and if you looked at all the races that suffered the most during this war, ogres would be probably number one. They lost their homeland. They were more scattered than ever. They were nomadic as it was, but now they're even more nomadic because they lost a bit of land as well when the Winter's War occurred. And they were a very proud nation, proud race, and to have that essentially made it worse. So those are the four big events that occurred there that would continue to affect the rest of Pannithor history. Now, I always have to pause here. Mark, did all that make sense?
Absolutely. And this is the beginning of the modern times and what a lot of people know about the lore and the history of Pannithor. It's also one of the saddest events for me because the splintering of the Brotherhood, which was my favorite faction at the time, and also during the global campaign that we had, the dwarf players, we actually won that sector of the map and yet still had to retreat across the chainway. So I've always I always carry that scar with me. I know people are sick of me saying it, but and I understand how it drove the story and stuff like that. But we won. I think we should have stayed, but it set the stage for basically what's coming up next. So
correct. Yeah, I mean,
to be fair, had to happen, but.
Yeah, to be fair, so in game it took place over a 4 year period, but in terms of Mantic, it was based off a summer campaign, and this was I feel like the Edge of the Abyss was the first real big summer campaign that they did that allowed people to influence the story and the outcome here. Yeah, I do acknowledge that. I think you're 100% right. It didn't have as much of an effect on the story as people hoped for, but it also laid the foundations of how they were going to do it in the future as well. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, before we know, they had another story where how we mentioned about the chainway being held out, that if you didn't win that section, all those people would have just died. And that the Free Dwarfs could have been greatly diminished in terms of whether they actually be a faction or not. Because at this time when the story took place, and the Edge of the Abyss story takes place during 2nd edition, to put it into context. Free Dwarfs weren't a faction. So Free Dwarfs was still as just dwarfs. Free Dwarfs didn't actually come into being a faction until 3rd edition. So it might have influenced whether they actually were going to become another faction or their own faction in 3rd edition. So I don't know. I would love to ask Ronnie or whoever was doing that at the time, Matt, whether that was the thinking behind it. But I do commend Mantic for doing something a summer campaign that can influence essentially the lore, and I do hope they continue. I do think the ones they've they have done since then are a little bit more convoluted and hasn't. It's, as someone that's trying to look at back on hindsight, it's very difficult to understand the story, and I really do think they should take some time of having a digestible way of understanding the story of a summer campaign or one of these stories to take place. Because if you ask me right now, give me the whole lowdown of the Edge of the Abyss, it's very hard because essentially there's 4 different things that occurs during that event, and there's not a really digestible novel or way for me to say, hey, read this, and that will sink in. I mean, you got the green book, and you could say refer to the lore PDF, but to be honest, it's quite difficult to explain. So I completely side with you your feelings on that one.
Yeah, this is a really significant event in the timeline. I mean, like I said,
Correct.
it's the beginning of the modern thing, and there was a lot of things that happened. It really, really shaped Pannithor going forward. It really was a significant event.
Correct. So if you do want to know more about the invasion of the Harpy Mountains, I suggest reading up on the book Honor's Price and Pride of a King. If you want to know more about the Orc invasion of the plains, read Claws on the Plain. It's a really good book there. The Flooding of the Abyss, there isn't really a lot there, but I have broken it down on the wiki if you do want a story there. But if you want the splintering of the Brotherhood, read Nature's Night. It really goes into the different orders, the Order of the Brother Mark and the Order of the Green Lady. There's also some short stories in the Edge of the Abyss novel compilation book that they have there. There's some goods, but Nature's Night is definitely one that really kind of shows you the difference between the two. I believe the one that founded the Order of the Brother Mark, his name's Odo, and that always reminds me of Star Trek. So I would suggest reading up on those, especially how I'm not quite sure of their future going forward in Kings of War, but I do think that they are unique enough factions that I really wish they'd do more with. Cool. All right, we'll move on to the event so now we're going to enter in 3rd edition. So everything we just talked about, and we basically from the War of the Quartz Scepter, that's really only just 1st edition there, and all the background history, you could say it's 1st edition, but so many things have changed over the years that you can't really incorporate all that into 1st edition. But specifically, 1st edition was the War of the Quartz Scepter, and then 2nd edition kind of started from the Abyssal Crusade to the Edge of the Abyss. You take out Dungeons & Dragons, so the separate game there. So the Edge of the Abyss was the final, you could say, 2nd edition. There was a few years later, a few other Kings of War, Clash of Kings books that happened after that. They kind of summarize some of the after effects of the Edge of the Abyss, which again is on the wiki, but nothing really significant in terms of what we'll go over here. So the first one of 3rd edition was Harpy's Rift, and this takes place in the year 3865. So around about 15 years later. So the Honor's Price, those events, and even Honor's Price takes place before Harpy's Rift, and then Pride of the King takes place after Harpy's Rift. So if you need some kind of scaling of where this is, it's there. So Harpy's Rift is one of those stories that I struggle to explain, but I'm going to try and do it the best I can. So there was an abyssal dwarf called Dravik Dulkin. And so essentially he was a crazy person, a crazy abyssal dwarf that even his experiments were freaking out the leadership of the abyssal dwarfs up north where they kind of were by the abyss. So he got sent away down south just to look after a hold and just to stay away and just look after the Harpy Mountains, which the abyssal dwarfs have conquered. Now, as Dravik was kind of going through the Harpy Mountains, kind of trying to find the holdout, the free dwarf holdouts, and just kind of getting rid of all them, he eventually comes across not really a vent, but some way of obtaining more power, so more magic. He found a way to tap into a vein that was all through Pannithor, which would unleash a whole lot of power, essentially making him extremely, extremely powerful. So what he did around the Crag Hud, he got a whole bunch of Ratkin and Abyssal Dwarfs to dig down to try and tap into this vein of power. And eventually he hit it, and it essentially sent a huge beam of light up into the sky, which everyone was able to see all the way from the Northern Alliance guys up north to the ones to the east, the ones to the south, all saw this huge beacon of energy being beamed into the sky and essentially acted like a moth to a flame kind of deal. And everyone's like, oh crap, what have the Abyssal Dwarfs done? They've released this kind of nexus of power, and that's essentially cause a whole bunch of noble races, so the dwarfs and the free dwarfs and the Basileans and the Northern Alliance, to congregate on this beacon to try and seal it back up because they know the power that it could unleash. And that's essentially what Harpy's Rift was, that rift opening up and unleashing so many power. Now, when that burst of energy was released, it also sent waves to the abyss as well. They were able to feel that power and realize all power started leaking into them. Essentially, it left a really gaping wound from that power into the mortal realm and essentially unleashed a lot. So that's how the Rift-Forged Orcs were created, because that power seeped into the abyss and they got some orcs, shoved it with that rift energy, which is now how you got Rift-Forged Orcs. And because of that time dilation that happens in the abyss, they spent years and years and years from their point of view becoming battle-hardened, and that's why the Rift-Forged Orcs are the way they are, is because they're a different type of orc. They're more militarized, they're more tougher, and they've been imbued with this magical energy, which basically, was because of Dravak. So eventually Dravak got beaten by the forces of good, and it's a big story, and we could do another episode we could do an episode about any of these events, but effectively the forces of good was able to seal it up, but it did leave quite a lot of things, such as that everyone saw that magical beacon, now know that magic still exists. Rift-Forged Orcs are now created, and now they were about to be unleashed upon the world. And it's implied there's a lot of other things that occurred that we don't know about that could lead into future stories as well. So Harpy's Rift is one of those real confusing ones, but that's the gist of it. We could go into the nitty-gritty of all the series events, but that's all you really need to know, is that the Harpy's Rift was sealed. Effectively, it lessened the Abyssal Dwarfs' hold on the Harpy Mountains, which is why the Free Dwarfs have started to resettle in the Harpy's Mountain and push out the Abyssal Dwarfs to the north. And we see that in Pride of the King, we see that in Honest Price. Not so much in Honest Price because it takes place before, but that's why we're starting to see the Free Dwarfs, because the Free Dwarfs have essentially been taken advantage of by the Dwarfs. For all those years they got kicked out of the Harpy Mountains, they're finally now starting to return. And that's essentially where we are from there. So that's in the year 3085. So the next year later, in 3866, this is when we see the broken alliance of the League of Roidana. So this is when essentially halflings came into the story, and the book Broken Alliance takes place. It takes place 2 years before the Clash of Kings 2022. Essentially, the halflings were taken advantage of. They made all the food for Roidana, and they were kind of sick of being taken advantage, treated like crap all the time, that they didn't have as much of a voice. They started to up the taxes on Roidana for the food, and then Roidana didn't really like that. They started raiding them as kind of like trying to strong-arm them. Eventually, halflings were like, no, you can't strong-arm us. We're just going to fight you. And that's when the fight broke out. Turns out a lot of the racist tensions that were being inflicted towards halflings actually came from Lord Draveld, who was trying to push his influence over and actually trying to kind of obtain the power of the League of Roidana with his agents smuggled into the politics of Roidana. Unfortunately, that backfired, and eventually the combined forces of the halflings and the League of Roidana managed to push out Draveld's forces. Eventually, they came to a sense of peace, but ultimately the Shires were now their own independent state. League of Roidana still were those 5 states combined, but effectively that's where they lied. So they get along. They're not happy with each other. They kind of pissed each other off on both sides, but ultimately they're now just independent from each other. And that's what the Broken Alliance novel is all about. 2 years later, in 3868, That's when we get Clash of Kings 2022. That's when we get Storm of the Shires. Effectively, that's when we get the Riftforged Orcs being unleashed upon the world. Initially, they attack Roydena first. They sound like they savaged it pretty badly, and then they go and attack the Shires, and the Shires put up such a fight, they end up winning, because the Halflings are very good at fighting. Aaron Coldwater, he's like a renowned tactician at this point in his life, and he's managed to he's the muster master. So he's the one in charge of all the forces. Managed to beat the Riftforged Orcs. It's not really explained what happens to Roydena during this time. However, there is information later on in the Clash of Kings 2025 that Roydena still exists. So I assume Roydena just got messed up a lot, but they managed to also beat the forces. Chances are the Halflings came and helped them, and they have a better relationship going forward. So that's Clash of Kings 2022. Now, the next event on the agenda is Shadow Horizons. Now, from 3868, so the invasion of the Riftforged Orcs, there are no dates. So all the events you're about to say, I can't tell you how far apart they've actually taken place. All I know is that they happen after the events because of just certain things that are in the story. So Clash of Kings 2024 came out at around the same time as Shadow Horizons, which was the summer campaign, and took place. There's not really any connection between that book and Shadow Horizons, but ultimately there's a lot of history and Clash of Kings 2024, it actually goes into the smashing the mirror of how we know it, and actually the writer of the Fall of Celestians wrote that. I have to double check that. Wrote that book, so it'll be interesting to see how that ties together. But ultimately, Shadow Horizons takes place around here at this time. We know that also ties in with Champions, with Lothal Voidheart. At the moment, she's called Bleakheart during these events. So we know she actually gets imprisoned during that event into the Void, which we find out how she escapes during Champions as well. So we know that takes place because Lothal's actually in the Edge of the Abyss campaign as well. So that kind of helps lead us to how this kind of goes in that timeline. So Shadow Horizons occurs. After that, that's when we get Clash of Kings 2025, which is Deepwater Crusade, which is the most recent book that we have. Effectively, the Harpy's Rift, when that exploded, it opened up new vents from the Abyss can escape from. Effectively, they had felt that energy from Harpy's Rift, had decided to reforge the Osgur's Axe, which will allow them to escape the Abyss, or the Wicked Ones on level 7. They could actually escape the Abyss, so they essentially attacked the Deepwater Crusade because there's the shard that they are trying to obtain, which is the last piece of the axe to complete the weapon, because for some reason that causes the weapon to be more powerful, I guess. And that's why the Deepwater Crusade occurs at that point. It's because they are escaping there. They're trying to get Osgur's Axe. Effectively, they were beaten by the combined forces of the Trident Realm, and also the Green Lady comes in and helps out a bit there of all these forces trying to beat the Wicked Ones back, because it is implied something from the East is coming, and they don't really want to deal with this shit. That's the way I interpret it, is that Green Lady's like, look, we've got too much shit happening in the East right now that's going to hurt us. We need to deal with this right now, deal with these Wicked Ones trying to escape. Essentially, they managed to beat the Wicked Ones back, and the Lord of Lies gets beaten as well. I'm sure he gets put back into the Abyss, because I don't think any demon dies. And that's essentially what the Deepwater Crusade. Again, these are some of the events we could dive more into. I'm really trying to be as vague as this episode's already an hour and 50 minutes long. But ultimately, they beat them back, and the waters are at peace once more. And then we get whatever's happening in Champions. I haven't really listed that as an event yet. All we know is that there's something up north that these companies are kind of moving towards, that there's a power. It's been hinted for a while that there is a power up north that is either locked away or that has been guarded. I think it could be winter being locked away and they are siphoning her power, or kind of just locked her away that they don't want her to escape, and that's the power that they're referring to. But ultimately, I would say next up in the story is probably whatever's happening with Champions. I know they have a story for that, but also probably 4th edition of what's happening to the east. So that's what we've got to look forward to. So hopefully, does that all make sense?
It all makes sense, and I'm wondering, if you take a look in there, you can see a lot of the 2-player sets that were released. You know what I mean? You got War in the Holds for Halpi's Rift, and you got the Broken Alliance. You can see them. Shattered Horizons. You can see, Coral Gate is the last one. So, it seems like when we get a good box set, I don't know if we're getting a summer campaign this year, and I don't think so. I thought we might have, but it doesn't sound like it. It's May, and I haven't really heard much about it. So.
We got the Summer of Sci-Fi last year, so you would think they'll do some Kings of War. I think they've just got too many things cooking, and I'd say the smartest thing is just let the dust settle for a bit. Because I think sometimes people get too much pressure of we need the next big major event. You can't do a Marvel thing and just keep having the world at peril every year. You kind of have to let the world kind of just settle for a little bit. And I think
it
with
worked
4th
for
edition,
Warhammer. But I agree with you. So it can't be 1 minute to midnight all the time. So
exactly. I mean, you could say it worked for Warhammer, but I mean, to be honest, lore is not always. With Warhammer, they always, because they are at the top, right? They always try and ruffle everyone's feathers every year and they make units redundant every year, and they do all that. You don't have to. You can slow things down and just let things be for a while. And if you go too quickly, you get franchise fatigue, and you see that with Marvel, of them releasing too much or trying to move things along the timeline too quickly. You just want people to sit on it for a while, and I think that's where we're at the moment. I think there's a good time to just stop, take stock, and kind of understand, allow these stories to be told. As I said, Claws of the Plane, that book has just come out, and that actually only takes place like a year or two after The Edge of the Abyss. So it's actually not in the current timeline at the moment. It actually takes place a little bit earlier, and you kind of have time to flesh out some of those stories that we don't know too much about. I would love a story on the Reckoning. I would love a better summary of Harpy's Rift, and having that make sense in terms of what we know and Honor's Price and Pride of the King, having that tie in nicely there, and just let the dust settle a bit before we go all doom and gloom. Because if you do that too much, you get a scenario that people this episode came from people starting to get more into the lore, but the biggest question is what's the timeline? What's the major events? Where are we in the world? Because if you hear Harpy's Rift and someone asks you, it's related, have you read about the Edge of the Abyss? If someone came to you and say, which one takes place first, Harpy's Rift or Edge of the Abyss? Most people don't know. So you want to slow down so people get more familiar with the lore. So when you release something that maybe is back in time, or whether it's coming up, they have a good idea why they should be excited. Because if it's the newest thing in the timeline, if you should say, all right, this takes place after the Deepwater Crusade, you're like, oh, this is the newest thing in the timeline. This is the most up to date. Or you go, this is actually a story about the Gilkin during the Winter's War, and you could go, oh, this is going to be years before. This is going to be something we already know how it kind of ends, but I don't know what takes place there. Timelines are so important with getting more invested into a story and into a franchise, and I think I'm okay with them not doing the summer campaign, especially how, and again, they haven't really confirmed it's definitely happening, but everyone kind of knows it's going to happen at the end of the year. We're going to get some really good 4th edition drops. There are so many good hints about what's coming next, like what's in the Champions of that logo coming out. I've always, based off the recent supplements of mentioning it, I always think the Zerki Ali Empire and the Tessimos Shoninit. So Samurai Undead and the
vampires. Yay!
Yeah. Undead vampires and the Zerks, I think, are going to play a part in it because they have been mentioned. And I think they'll be really cool and unique. And I think let the story breathe for a while. I think every faction has its really cool elements to it. I think the Order of the Green Lady and the Order of the Brother Mark, those stories could really evolve and change, and I could really see them going somewhere really unique with them, especially in terms of unit design. I think having knights mixed with like nature, I think they need to explore that a bit more. Maybe wooden shields, but the wood is a special kind of wood that's imbued with like the Green Lady's magic. So you can have wooden shields and wooden armor, which is kind of really would dive more into that. And there's so much more you can do with it. So that's the reason why this episode exists, because people really want to know how the timeline works. And I've done my best to try and put things in the row. It's not going to be perfect. And there is a broken down timeline of I've got characters' birth dates in there based on the fact that someone said, I've been around for like 20 years, so I went back and worked out when they would have actually been born. So all those links are going to be in the description if you actually want the broken down of that. I mean, I've got one of the, let me think, Captain Chan Furnace, which is a captain in Pius. I've got his birthday being 3,826. So I've got it broken down to when people are born. So I would recommend checking it out.
Yeah, very, very cool. I mean, my big question is, this is all kind of focused on this part of Pannithor. If we push east, what does that do? Are we going to focus strictly on the east, or are we going to have a focus on the east as well as our current map of Pannithor, and how do they mix? And it's going to be interesting to watch it expand. So,
yeah, I mean, we don't know how much of the Northern Hemisphere we're actually seeing based off that map as well. We could only be seeing a quarter of it, right? So there could be a lot of the upper east, you could say. And we know that there's a wider map. If you look at the table of Pannithor, I think there's like a map room or something. You can see something to the west as well. There's a big landmass to the west that we haven't explored as well. But that could be connected to the east. It could just be, because that's how globes work. I mean, actually, there is nothing that has proven that we actually are playing on a globe. This could be a flat Earth scenario. There's nothing to actually say it's not.
No, very true. But, in our little human minds, we make it into a globe.
We make it. I don't know. I mean, in real life, some people don't make it into a globe.
That's true. That's true.
But ultimately, we've got so much more to explore. And I think with the East, we have had hints about what's going on. I do know a lot more of the writers of the books are involved into writing 4th edition lore, which is such a huge relief. Not to bag on the ones that did the original lore, but let's say there's a lot of holes in it that kind of like, I'm like, not quite sure about that. But having a lot more authors involved in there, a lot more voices who have written, I think one of the biggest contributors to, I think, 4th edition is probably going to be Clint Werner, who did the Rise of Celestians. And remember, we talked on the Countercharge when we did the Rise of Celestians review, and he did heavily imply that the twins that I mentioned in that book are going to come back, and there could be something in the East happening with them. He was very vague on that. He has offered to come on the show when the Rise of Celestians, Fall of Celestians comes out, or if there's a big announcement about lore or something, he's more than willing to pop on, and we could have a really good deep dive into that. There's a bunch of people that didn't really like Rise of Celestians. I liked it. I liked that good snapshot of you're seeing like some history over the course of 300 years and snippets and so forth, and shows you how slow things actually go when it comes to ancient times, because things don't happen as rapidly as they do in modern day. Back in the days, invasions took hundreds of years. It wasn't done over the course of 5 or 10 years. So, that's about it. I've rambled on enough. Is there anything you want to add there, Mark?
Well, the only thing that just came to my mind was what a cool 2-player set that would be to have each, if the twins are battling, to have each twin leading a force inside the 2-player starter set. But hey, my mind rambles, so I just think it'd be very cool.
On that note, and when they're talking about twins, they are mentioned as twin Celestians. So they both will have a wicked half and a shining half. So you could have the wicked halves, maybe the wicked half of one of the twins manage to kill the shining half of the other twin, and then vice versa. And then you could have the wicked one versus the shining one, twins.
Yep. So we got lots of lore coming up. We're already making it up already. So, but
Yeah, exactly.
I'm looking forward to it. Are you still thinking the X race is insectoid or something like that, or is that what you're rooting for, or do you have anything that you want to see out of the new race?
I'm going to call them Zerks, just until we can figure out the pronunciation. So the Zerks that I do think that they're the next. They're the one the most likely, just because of how many hints. I mean, the Zerks have been mentioned since I think one of the Armada supplements, and then they've basically been mentioned every single supplement since. So it seems like the more common one. I mean, I hope that they're insectoid, just because it's a unique faction. I'm trying to think I always think of Kings of War being that game that you can basically build the army of dreams. Maybe it's not the best from a meta point of view, but anyone that's a dirty casual like myself coming to the game and go, hey, I just want to make a really cool army that I like. I want that to be open to everybody. And so looking at the current selection, you got hippie knights and you got the more militarized kind of formal knights, but you also got the god faction, which following faction, which is Basileans, and you got Ratkin, you got orcs as well, and obviously Riftforged orcs and orcs. There's two different things. I think normal orcs are a little bit more savage and more looser with the clothing, and Riftforged orcs are a bit more together, more militaristic, kind of more of like the brother mark, but an orc version kind of deal. So based off what we have in front of us, I think an insectoid race would be really cool to see. I do like the idea of undead samurais. That kind of, I do think the race. I mean, and people do complain that there's enough undead, but to be having like an Asian-inspired kind of undead race, I think would be really, really cool. But I would like to see insectoids. Maybe some more kind of humanoid kind of, and because I mean, we do know ogres existed before Celestians arrived. I'm suspecting there'll be a lot of races that exist before Celestians arrived. Like we know that River Guard, and we know Pond Wardens, which evolved from frogs. They weren't actually. I don't think they were created by Trident Realms. They always implied that they were refugees that joined the Trident Realm. So there could be a lot of different, like a dog race, maybe a dog inspired race would be pretty cool. I mean, I'm trying to think of a race that we haven't really seen in Warhammer before that could really be aesthetically really pleasing. It's like maybe dog race. I would love hobgoblins riding on beautiful birds. I've always said that they should make a New Zealand speaking race, hobgoblins, which ride very beautiful birds into battle. And that's my dream race right there.
There you go. Well, I really don't have a guess. So I'm just looking forward to it. So
I could be completely wrong, but I'm fairly confident the Zerkies have to be something. Whether it's a fallen faction, whether it's a faction that they're not going to introduce for years, there's a reason why they keep on including it into the supplements. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be influencing Western Pannithor. So I mean, you got to have a reason why they're fighting. So, and how they're going to do it. But, I mean, Ronnie did mention that we're getting something special for champions in November. So, I think that's what the new faction symbol's all about. We're going to get a 10th company for champions, and it's going to be a new race that we haven't had before. And the other thing, too, is you got to consider is we always get the 2-player starter set based off of the plastics that were released in the year. So right now, the only refresh we've had is Basileia with the cavalry. So what's the other half going to be? It seems like we're getting Basileia for one side of the starter box, unless we've got 2 more things coming this year. We maybe get 3 things, and I mean, they don't throw Basileia in there because actually those Basileia and Cavalry are in the Champions 2-player starter set. So they've already showed up in a 2-player starter set. So it's possible we've still got 2 slots out there. So, and I really kind of like that pattern a lot. I love the 2-player starter sets, and I like the new plastics, and I like the way that you get the little mini campaign in there and everything. And, I like the way that's all running. So I hope they keep it up.
I like that move. I don't like them not really touching on what people want sometimes. I think with the Trident Realm was a good example of
Placoderms.
Yeah, I mean, with Trident Realms, they've been around for years now, and you had with the Forces of the Abyss, which we found after the Trident Realm came out, we saw that Lord of Lies model and the lore attached to it, and it was badass. It was really cool. The model looked cool. The lore was cool. Unfortunately, when they did the Trident Realms, they kind of didn't really do a good... I mean, they should have done the Trident Kings, right? Like, the Trident Kings, you can have 3 variants of it. They could have just introduced the Trident Kings model with the ability of swapping out the 3 different variants. So it was one of those misses. So I agree with you. I do like that refresh or those releases that they have, but they also need to make sure, one, it's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing in terms of when they're releasing it, but also make sure you're listening to what your fans want, because I'm pretty sure people didn't want more frogs. That's just the feeling I got.
Yeah, no, placoderms and geckos is what we needed. You needed
Exactly.
to expand the things that you had in the army list. I hate to say it, we already had resin and mellow frogs, so it was just it coming out in plastic. It was nothing revolutionary. It was nothing new. It was very uninspiring.
The Coral Giant wasn't enough. The Coral Giant, everyone had already made the proxy with the normal giant as it was, and it wasn't as impressive. Now, if that Coral Giant looked like something really, really cool, maybe, but it was very a nothing burger. But I don't mean to bag on Mantic at all. This is just more of like, we want the best we want the best game, we want the best models and all that stuff. So I mean, I hope everyone takes this from a place of respect and love, because I mean, we obviously don't, we're just fans of it. So we want the business to work, and we want Mantic to grow, and Kings of War to grow, and we mean this from the best place in the world.
Absolutely. Oh, hearts all the way. We love it. So, but
exactly.
Again, we already had a placoderm model, and we had geckos riding slashers, so it would have been great. But I guess it gives them another chance to do it sometime in the future. But
exactly,
we shall see. Right. I'm just excited to see what else is coming this year. So.
Yeah, and on that note, so obviously we're going to keep on doing these lore episodes every time. It's a lot of fun. I find it hugely enjoyable. It helps me update the wiki as well. Kind of points me in the topic. So if you have a topic out there, if it was any of the events we went over today or we glossed over, if you want us to deep dive into one, whether it's Harpy's Rift, whether it's Edge of the Abyss, whether it's any of these books, or if it's a particular faction you want us to deep dive into, or race, just let us know in the comments below, or send us an email at kingsofwarwiki@gmail.com, and we will do it. I mean, this is an open book kind of forum. I had my inspiration here by just reading someone's comment about the major events there, and yeah, we'll take the topic and we'll run with it, and or just find something that inspires us to do it. So if you do want to stay in touch with us, make sure you join our Discord. All these links are down below. So Discord, got a Facebook, got a Patreon. You can chuck us a buck. It allows us to plug a little bit more into the recording equipment and to running the podcast. We also have email. What else have we got? We've got YouTube. Mate. Yeah, we've got YouTube. It's going really well. We actually have recently we have more people listening on YouTube than we do actually listening to on Spotify, which is a really, really cool thing. And we've got some YouTube exclusives possibly cooking in the background. I know, we've got so much that we're working on, and the more we are pointed in the right direction, the more likely we'll get it right. So it'd actually be something people enjoy. Any last words from you there, Mark?
No, but thanks for leading us through this, Dave. I mean, it's a exciting thing, and I'm looking forward to exploring it more, and I'm looking forward to the future. But I think this is a great, table of contents so that you can follow along and you kind of get an idea of what's going on. So, Winter's War isn't current. So that's a big thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's always in flux. A lot of the history that we went through, the dates could change, they could recon stuff, but the key to it is to talk about it because we like talking about it. And and the more we talk about it, the more people will get involved and the more of an interesting conversation we can have.
There you go. All right. Well, folks, that's it for this time around here on Pannilore. We're very excited that you joined us for this episode. And as Dave said, reach out to us and we'll put together the next episode and we'll see you soon. So, all right. And until next time, take care.